He mocked Senator JD Vance, dismissed the law, and ruled his courtroom like a personal kingdom, until justice finally caught up with him in the most humiliating way imaginable. The courtroom in Cincinnati was packed, tension thick in the air. The dark wood paneling bore witness to decades of trials, but today, something felt different, like the room itself was bracing for impact. At the center of it all sat Judge Robert Calloway, a man whose name carried weight, but not the kind most judges aspired to. His reputation was built on theatrics, interruptions, and turning legal proceedings into his personal spectacle. Some called him passionate, others reckless. But today, he was more impatient than ever, flipping through documents with an audible sigh, barely acknowledging the witness stand. And then there was JD Vance. The senator sat composed, his navy suit crisp, his posture unshaken. He wasn't easily rattled. He had faced sharper critics and tougher battles. But even he could sense the hostility radiating from the bench. It started the moment he was called to testify. Judge Calloway barely looked up. "Let's make this quick, Senator. I assume you have something relevant to say?" Vance adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began laying out the facts with measured precision. But Calloway wasn't listening. He leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as if he were already waiting to pounce. And the moment Vance made his first key point, Calloway struck. All right. We get it," he scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "You're here to make a speech? I don't need a campaign rally in my courtroom." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. The court reporter hesitated before resuming her typing. Even the attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Vance, however, remained unshaken. His eyes locked onto the judge's, a flicker of a frown appearing, but he didn't engage. Instead, he continued. Calloway sighed loudly, flipping a page in his notes with exaggerated effort. "Let's move this along before we all die of boredom, shall we?" A few chuckles echoed through the courtroom, some from Calloway's loyal defenders, others from those laughing out of sheer discomfort. Vance's lawyer, sitting just feet away, stiffened. Leaning toward his colleague, he muttered, "This is a joke. That's not just bias, it's outright contempt." The younger attorney beside him nodded, keeping his voice low. "He's baiting him. He wants a reaction." But Vance refused to give him one. He simply adjusted his tie and continued. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this testimony is important for the integrity of—" "Spare me the lecture, Senator," Calloway interrupted, shaking his head with mock exhaustion. He leaned forward, his voice quieter but razor-sharp. "Let's be real. You're not here for justice. You're here to grandstand. It's what you people do best." The murmurs stopped. It was subtle but unmistakable, the way he said it. The deliberate condescension laced into every syllable. Vance's jaw tensed, but still he didn't react. He simply exhaled through his nose, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. But across the room, his legal team was already in motion. The tide was shifting. Calloway, oblivious, leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping the bench, his smirk unchanged. He thought he was in control, but the courtroom wasn't on his side anymore. The murmurs that followed weren't of approval. People shifted in their seats. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Something was coming, and this time, it wasn't Calloway pulling the strings. He ridiculed Senator JD Vance, dismissed the law, and ruled his courtroom like a personal empire, until justice finally caught up with him in the most humiliating way possible. The Cincinnati courtroom was packed, the kind of crowd that made people shift uneasily in their seats. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, steeped in history, but today the air felt different, charged, tense, as if something was about to break. At the center of it all sat Judge Robert Calloway. His name carried weight, though not the kind most judges aspired to. He was infamous for his theatrics, cutting people off mid-sentence and turning the courtroom into his own personal stage. Some called him passionate, others called him reckless. Today he was impatient, flipping through documents with audible sighs, barely acknowledging the witness stand. And then there was JD Vance. The senator sat upright, composed, his navy suit crisp and immaculate. He was no stranger to pressure, having faced sharper words and tougher crowds. But even he could sense the hostility radiating from the bench. It started the moment he was called to testify. Calloway barely glanced up. "Let's make this quick. Senator, I assume you have something relevant to say?" Vance didn't flinch. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began, his tone steady and controlled. But Calloway wasn't listening. He leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And when Vance made his first key point, the judge pounced. All right, we get it," Calloway scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "You're here to make a speech. I don't need a campaign rally in my courtroom." A murmur rippled through the audience. The court reporter hesitated before resuming her typing. Even the attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. Vance, however, remained unshaken. He met the judge's gaze, a hint of a frown appearing, but he refused to engage. He simply continued. Calloway wasn't done. He let out an exaggerated sigh, flipping through his notes with theatrical boredom. "Let's move this along before we all die of old age, shall we?" Scattered chuckles echoed in the gallery, some from Calloway's usual supporters, others from those laughing out of sheer discomfort. Vance's lead attorney stiffened. "This is a joke," he muttered to his colleague. "That's not just bias, that's outright contempt." The younger attorney beside him nodded. "He wants a reaction." But Vance wasn't giving him one. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this testimony is critical to—" "Spare me the lecture, Senator," Calloway cut in, shaking his head. He leaned forward, his next words quiet but razor-sharp. "Let's be real. You're not here for justice. You're here to grandstand. It's what you people do best." The murmurs stopped. The insult wasn't subtle. It was deliberate, laced with condescension. Vance's jaw tensed. But still, he didn't react. He simply exhaled, his hands clasped, in front of him. But across the courtroom, his legal team was already in motion. Calloway, oblivious, was enjoying himself. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers against the bench, smirking at Vance like a man who had already won. Maybe he had never respected him. But the courtroom wasn't on his side today. The murmurs that followed his last remark weren't amused. People shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged knowing glances. The tension thickened. Still, Vance refused to take the bait. He straightened his papers, cleared his throat, and pressed on. Calloway groaned, actually groaned. "Oh, give it a rest, Senator," he sighed, turning to the plaintiff's attorney. "Do we really need to sit through another 5 minutes of this? I thought we were dealing with evidence, not ego." A few gasps rippled through the room. The plaintiff's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, glanced at Vance before responding. "Your Honor, Senator Vance's testimony is relevant to the integrity of this case." Calloway waved a hand. "If you say so." He turned back to Vance, his gaze narrowing. "But make it quick. My patience for political nonsense is wearing thin." Vance didn't rise to the insult. He continued speaking. But Calloway wasn't just interrupting now. He was mocking. Rolling his eyes, muttering under his breath, scoffing loud enough for the jury to hear. At the defense table, Vance's lead attorney exhaled sharply. "This is unreal. He's not even trying to hide it." The younger attorney nodded. "Should we file a motion?" "Not yet," the lead attorney said. "But we're getting close." Across the room, a reporter scribbled furiously in her notebook. She had covered enough trials to know when a judge had crossed the line. Calloway wasn't just stepping over it. He was sprinting past it, straight into misconduct territory, and he was too arrogant to notice. "Tell me, Senator," Calloway drawled, resting his elbows on the bench, "when exactly did you become an expert on constitutional law?" Vance met his gaze. "I studied law before entering public service, Your Honor." "Oh, right," Calloway said with mock realization. "I forgot. Another politician who thinks reading a few books makes him an expert." Silence. Even the bailiff, a man who had worked in this courtroom for over a decade, didn't move. Calloway wasn't just being rude. He was belittling a sitting. U.S. Senator in open court on record in front of a jury, and he didn't care. Vance let a few seconds pass. Then he leaned slightly forward, his voice calm, measured. "Your Honor, I'd appreciate it if we could focus on the case." Calloway laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, that's rich," he chuckled, glancing toward the jury as if they were in on the joke. "He wants me to focus. You hear that?" No one laughed with him. In fact, the room was eerily still. Something had shifted. For years, Calloway's arrogance had allowed him to dominate his courtroom, to mock, belittle, and steamroll anyone who stood before him. But today, it wasn't working, and he was too wrapped up in his own ego to realize it. He turned. "Back to Vance. Here's my advice, Senator. Stick to politics. Leave the law to people who actually know what they're doing." The tension snapped. Jurors stiffened. The court reporter hesitated. At the defense table, Vance's legal team didn't even bother whispering anymore. "This is blatant misconduct," one of them muttered, and then quietly the lead attorney reached for his phone. Because Judge Calloway had just crossed the line, and someone was about to make sure he paid for it. Vance barely blinked. His hands remained folded, his expression controlled. But something had shifted in his posture. He wasn't just tolerating Calloway's behavior, he was letting it play out. Letting the arrogance dig deeper. Letting the courtroom see it for what it was. He didn't need to fight back. The judge was doing the work for him. Calloway, oblivious to the mounting tension in the room, let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking his head like a disappointed parent. "You're really going to sit there and act like you're the expert?" he scoffed, flipping through the case file as if bored. "Like your opinion matters more than the law?" He chuckled to himself, his smirk widening. "I swear, politicians these days think they can walk into a courtroom and start rewriting the rules." Vance remained composed. "Your Honor, I'm here under subpoena to testify on—" "I don't care why you're here," Calloway cut in, his voice sharp, dripping with condescension. "This courtroom isn't your personal stage, and I'm not here to entertain your political fantasies." A murmur spread through the gallery. This wasn't just misconduct. It was personal. Across the room, Vance's lead attorney, Mark Hendricks, remained still, but his grip tightened around his pen. He had handled difficult judges before, but this was something else entirely. He leaned toward his co-counsel, lowering his voice. "Is the motion ready?" The younger attorney nodded. "Filed 5 minutes ago." Hendricks gave the smallest of nods. "Good." The judge thought he had control. That was about to change, but Calloway kept going. "The way I see it, Senator, you're wasting my time. Everyone's time, really." He let out a short laugh. "Frankly, if I wanted to hear someone recite talking points, I'd turn on cable news." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. The jury, once engaged, now looked uncertain, wary even of the man presiding over the case. Calloway still didn't notice. He leaned forward, smirking. "Here's the deal. I'll give you 30 more seconds, that's it. After that, we're moving on to something actually worthwhile." At the defense table, attorneys exchanged glances, some barely hiding their disbelief. The court clerk, a woman who had worked under Calloway for over a decade, hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. 2 men entered, moving with quiet authority. They weren't court staff. They were federal marshals, and the second they stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. Calloway didn't notice at first, too, wrapped up in his own moment. "All right, Vance," he drawled. "Make it count, 30 seconds, go." But Vance didn't respond, because he had seen them. The marshals moved with purpose, their eyes locked on the bench. Hendricks saw them too. His grip on the pen loosened. Only then did Calloway sense the shift. His smirk wavered. "What's with the whispering?" He glanced at the attorneys, then the gallery. "Someone want to let me in on the joke?" Neither marshal spoke. They simply stepped forward, stopping just feet from the bench. The taller one, a man with a sharp, no-nonsense expression, reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "Judge Robert Calloway," he announced. The name hit the air like a gavel striking wood. Calloway's expression twitched. The lead marshal took another step forward. "You need to come with us." Silence. A deep, Uneasy silence wrapped around the courtroom like a noose. At the defense table, attorneys stiffened. The jury, already wary, glanced around waiting for anyone to explain what was happening. The court clerk's hands hovered over her keyboard, frozen in place. Calloway blinked, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me?" The marshal didn't blink. "Judge Calloway, you are currently under investigation for judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice. We have a warrant for your arrest." The smirk vanished. Color drained from Calloway's face so fast it was almost comical. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again. He blinked, waiting for someone to correct what had to be a mistake. No one did. The gallery was dead silent, save for the soft clatter of a single pen rolling off a court clerk's desk. And for the first time all day, Calloway looked unsure of himself. The marshals weren't waiting for him to process it. They moved, reaching for the cuffs. His confidence cracked. Not a full collapse, not yet, but the shift was undeniable. His smirk faltered. His fingers tensed against the bench. "You must be joking," he scoffed, forcing a chuckle. His voice carried an edge now, no longer steady. His gaze flicked around the room, searching for someone to intervene, to push back against the absurdity of what he was hearing. No one moved. No one spoke. The marshals remained stone-faced. "This is a courtroom," Calloway snapped, jabbing a finger toward them. "My courtroom. You don't just barge in here like this." The lead marshal didn't flinch. He simply held up the warrant. "Judge Calloway, this is an active federal investigation. You need to come with us." The tension thickened. At the defense table, attorneys sat frozen, exchanging wide-eyed glances. The court clerks hesitated, hands hovering over their keyboards, uncertain whether to record this or pretend it wasn't happening. And then there was JD Vance. He remained still, hands folded neatly in front of him, expression unreadable. But there was something in the way he sat, calm, collected, as if he had already seen this coming. Calloway's breathing picked up. He clenched the armrests of his chair, shaking his head. No, I don't think so." His voice wavered now, the bravado unraveling. "I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but I'm in the middle of a trial, and You are no longer in session," the marshal interrupted, his tone even but firm. "You are under arrest." The words hung in the air, suffocating the last remnants of Calloway's arrogance. The gallery remained silent. Reporters had their phones out, some recording, others typing furiously. Calloway's gaze darted around, mind racing for an escape. His eyes landed on the bailiff. "Get these men out of here." The bailiff didn't move. A beat passed, Calloway's face contorted, anger replacing shock. That was a command. Still nothing. The bailiff hesitated, reluctant to meet his gaze. Because everyone knew, they had always known, that Calloway wasn't a fair judge, that his rulings leaned too conveniently in certain directions, that his temper could tip cases before arguments even started. But now it wasn't just whispered suspicion. Now it was official. Calloway shot up from his chair, sending his gavel clattering onto the desk. "I will not be humiliated like this." His voice cracked. "Do you understand who I am?" The lead marshal's expression didn't change. He stepped closer, his hand resting near his cuffs. "Judge, I strongly suggest you cooperate." Calloway let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, you suggest? That's cute." His voice dripped with sarcasm, but it was hollow now, forced, desperate. "And if I don't?" The marshal didn't hesitate. "Then we take you by force." Another thick silence. Calloway exhaled sharply through his nose. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The arrogance in Calloway's posture hadn't vanished, but it was unraveling beneath the weight of reality. Bravado still clung to him, but something else was creeping in. Panic. His gaze swept the gallery, the reporters, the jury. And then, Vance, still unmoving, still watching. And for the first time in his career, Calloway wasn't in control. The realization struck like a slap. His breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, his face flushing. a stark contrast to the icy silence settling over the room. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, his voice lower now, but no less venomous. "A massive mistake." The lead. Marshall didn't flinch. He simply extended his hand, palm up. "Turn around." Calloway let out a hollow chuckle. "You think I'm just going to comply? Let you march me out of here in cuffs like some common criminal?" "You're a criminal," the marshal replied, his voice steady. "Now turn around." Calloway's jaw tightened. His eyes darted from the bailiff to the clerks, to the attorneys, the jury, anyone, someone. He was searching for a lifeline, but none came. "You don't understand." He tried again, voice tight. "This is political, a hit job. I have connections. That's enough." The marshal took a step forward. Calloway instinctively stepped back, bumping into his chair. His hands clutched the desk, gripping the last remnants of his authority. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, I'm not doing this." The second marshal, silent until now, finally spoke. "Judge, you can walk out of here with dignity, or we can drag you out, your choice." Calloway's hands trembled against the desk, his chest rose and fell too quickly. He had spent years controlling the fate of others with the swing of a gavel. And now, in an instant, he was just another defendant. Another man answering for his actions. Still Vance watched, silent. He had not spoken since the marshals entered. He didn't need to. The tension stretched between Calloway and the marshals. Then he moved. Not fast, not aggressively, but enough. He straightened, exhaling sharply through his nose. His hands balled into fists at his sides, knuckles white as he forced himself to remain composed. The marshal stepped behind him, the metallic clink of the cuffs slicing through the quiet. Calloway squeezed his eyes shut. Click. The cuffs locked around his wrists. A hush fell over the room, thick with disbelief. Even those who had seen it coming, the attorneys, the journalists, the clerks, sat frozen, as if waiting for someone to announce it was all a mistake. It wasn't. Calloway swallowed, hard, his shoulders rigid. His head remained high, but not out of arrogance anymore. Now it was defiance. The marshal placed a firm hand on his arm, guiding him down the steps from the bench. His footsteps echoed, not as a judge, but as a man in custody. For a fleeting second, his eyes flicked toward Vance. Vance met his gaze, steady, unmoved. Calloway was the first to look away. The gallery, the jury, the attorneys, every eye in the courtroom followed as he was led down the aisle. Past rows of stunned faces, past the very chamber he had once ruled with an iron grip. As he neared the exit, something tumbled from his desk, his gavel. It hit the floor with a hollow thud, a final punctuation to his fall, and then Judge Robert Calloway walked out in handcuffs. His reign was over. The door swung shut behind him, but the weight of what had just transpired hung thick in the air. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the courtroom itself needed a moment to process the downfall of the man who once commanded it. JD Vance remained seated, fingers tapping slowly against the table, calm, measured. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking. He was simply absorbing the moment. Across from him, lead defense attorney Mark Hendricks let out a slow exhale and leaned back in his chair. "Well," he muttered under his breath, "didn't see that coming." His co-counsel chuckled, still staring at the door. "I did." On the other side of the aisle, the plaintiff's attorney, the same one Calloway had dismissed earlier, straightened her papers with deliberate precision. "I assume we're getting a new judge." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the courtroom, tentative at first. Even that felt surreal. A judge had just been arrested mid-trial. The court clerk, still dazed, finally found her voice. She turned toward the attorneys, steadying herself. "The bow. Court will reconvene once an alternate judge is assigned." People shifted in their seats, murmuring. Lawyers exchanged glances, trying to make sense of what came next. The jury sat frozen, uncertain whether they should stay or go. But the reporters, they were already at work. Near the back, a cluster of them furiously typed on their phones, sending out breaking news alerts. Others whispered into recorders, capturing the historic moment. One reporter, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, turned to her colleague. "This isn't just a case anymore," she murmured. "This is history." Her colleague nodded, glancing toward the door where Calloway had disappeared. "He's finished." The gallery was still half full when JD Vance finally rose. He gathered his notes, nodded to his legal team, then strode toward the exit. As he passed, people instinctively stepped aside. Some met his gaze, nodding with quiet respect. Others simply watched, taking in the man who had weathered the storm without flinching. A reporter caught up to him just as he reached the hallway. "Senator Vance," she called. He stopped, turning slightly. "Yes?" She hesitated, then asked, the question already circulating in every mind. "Did you know this was coming?" Vance studied her for a moment. Then, with the faintest hint of a smile, he adjusted his watch. "Let's just say, justice has a way of catching up." And with that he walked away, leaving behind the courtroom and the memory of Judge Calloway's reign. Power is intoxicating. It makes people believe they are untouchable, that they can bend the rules, silence voices, and act without consequence. But the truth is, no one, not even those in the highest positions, can escape accountability forever. Judge Calloway wielded his authority with arrogance, twisting justice to suit his own bias. He belittled, silenced, and dismissed those who challenged him. But the law doesn't answer to egos. It answers to truth. And when corruption is exposed, the fall is always harder than the climb. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and stay tuned. Because justice isn't just about laws, it's about people willing to stand up even when the odds are against them.